Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The royal train had carried monarchs through wars, celebrations, funerals, and moments of national uncertainty. But tonight, its most dramatic journey never began. Minutes before Queen Camilla was expected to board, Prince William issued a direct order, removing her access entirely. The doors remained locked. Her security detail was dismissed, and at the center of the decision was a leaked internal memo containing instructions the future king was never supposed to see. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla had expected an overnight journey tied to a major royal engagement. Staff had prepared her private compartment, security officers had checked the route, and her household was waiting nearby. The royal train was not ordinary transport. It was a protected symbol of sovereign authority, used for senior duties, sensitive travel, and moments when the monarchy needed privacy and trust. Then the Queen arrived and saw that nothing was moving. Camilla slowed as an equerry stepped toward her. He was a senior royal attendant responsible for carrying out formal instructions, and his face told her the order would not be softened. She looked toward the sealed doors, then back again. Her authorization, he said, had been withdrawn immediately. The Queen did not answer. She glanced behind her, aware that her aides had heard every word. Humiliation replaced confusion. "Did this come from Charles?" she asked. The equerry hesitated, then gave the name she had not expected: William. The prince had stripped Camilla of access after receiving a leaked palace memo issued through her private office. The document proposed changing passenger restrictions, altering staff reporting lines, and widening private access to protected compartments, without consulting the Prince of Wales. That title belonged to the heir to the throne, expected to carry future responsibility for the crown. To William, the memo was not harmless administration. It was a direct attempt to weaken his authority. He did not merely postpone her journey. The future king ordered her access code removed from the royal transport system, cutting off automatic entry and making the restriction personal and impossible to ignore. Camilla's expression hardened. She asked for the exact wording of the memo and demanded to know who had released it. No one answered. Her staff remained frozen as she turned away from the locked train. What she did not know was that William had already summoned Charles to an emergency private meeting. The locked carriage doors were only the first sign of what had changed. Behind palace walls, a father and son were about to decide whether the memo represented a mistake or a deliberate challenge to the future king. For William, the memo was an attack on authority. For Camilla, the locked train became a public wound she could not conceal. And for King Charles, the conflict placed two of the most important people in his life on opposite sides of a line he had spent years trying to erase. The royal train had stopped moving, but inside the family, old resentments were gathering speed, and no one could safely step away. William stood alone in his office and read the memo again. The Prince of Wales was the heir to the throne, the person expected to protect the future stability of the monarchy, and he believed every system tied to royal security had to remain clear, controlled, and free from private interference. Official travel was not a personal convenience. It carried risk, responsibility, and consequences that could reach far beyond one journey. The prince placed the document flat on his desk, but his hand stayed pressed against it. His anger was quiet. That made it more dangerous. The wording suggested that Camilla's office could approve extra passengers and decide which security officers entered protected train compartments. To him, that opened the door to private guests or unofficial advisors moving through a secure royal space, without his office even knowing. Camilla returned to her residence carrying the weight of the platform with her. She removed her gloves slowly, while an aide began explaining the changes to her schedule. The Queen Consort cut him off before he finished and told everyone to leave. Access to the train had never been only about travel. It represented trust, recognition, and her place beside the king. Losing it felt like being pushed away from the center of royal life. She remained silent after the door closed. The humiliation was still fresh, but beneath it grew something harder. Camilla believed William had chosen the most public way possible, to remind her that her position depended on rules he was increasingly prepared to enforce. Charles received the news while preparing for an evening briefing. The king removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and said nothing. His private secretary waited, then shifted uneasily, as the silence stretched on. The monarch understood the danger immediately. Supporting his wife could weaken the heir. Supporting his son could make Camilla feel abandoned. Then Charles made his move. He sent separate messages ordering both of them to attend a private meeting the following morning. Camilla agreed without delay. William's reply was shorter and colder. The restriction would remain in force, no matter what was said. By dawn, the dispute was no longer about a missed journey. It had become a test of whether personal loyalty could survive when royal authority was challenged in writing. The leaked memo did not appear from nowhere. Its language had been shaped by months of private frustration, disputed schedules, and quiet attempts to expand Camilla's control over royal travel. But one journey changed everything. During a confidential rail trip weeks earlier, William discovered that a passenger had entered a restricted carriage without appearing on the approved manifest. That single breach became the moment every later decision would trace back to the point when suspicion hardened into action. Camilla's office had already been pressing for greater freedom over her journeys. The Queen wanted her staff to organize travel without waiting for approval from the Prince of Wales's security representatives, the officers responsible for protecting the heir and reviewing risks linked to his official movements. Palace coordinators allowed small schedule changes because they believed the dispute was administrative. They did not yet understand that control itself had become the real issue. William discovered the truth during a late return from a charity engagement. The prince entered the rear conference carriage and found one of Camilla's private advisors seated inside a restricted compartment. A passenger manifest was the approved list, showing exactly who could travel, and the man's name was nowhere on it. The prince stopped beside him and asked who had authorized his presence. The advisor opened his mouth, but Camilla entered before he could answer. The Queen said calmly that she had approved it herself. William's expression changed at once. He told her that personal permission could not replace formal security clearance. The future king explained that restricted carriages carried sensitive communications, protected schedules, and private discussions that could affect the entire household. One unapproved passenger was not a minor mistake. It was a breach. Camilla refused to retreat. She reminded him that she was the queen and should not need permission to invite a trusted member of her own staff. To her, his objection felt like another attempt to reduce her authority. To William, her answer proved that the rules were being treated as optional. The prince closed the compartment door and said every access rule would now be reviewed. Camilla heard more than procedure in his voice. She understood the gesture as a warning. Days later, her office began drafting a memo to formalize wider control over passenger approval and compartment access. A senior transport official refused to carry out the changes, kept a copy, and passed it through a secure palace channel to William's office. Then the final paragraph changed everything. It stated that objections from the Prince of Wales's staff should be treated as advice, not commands. When William read that sentence, he understood that aids and careful messages were no longer enough. Camilla would have to answer him face to face. There were no cameras, no waiting courtiers, and no ceremonial smiles when William entered the private sitting room. Camilla was already standing beside the fireplace, the leaked memo resting on a table between them. Charles remained near the window, hoping his presence would prevent the meeting from becoming personal. It did not. Within moments, the Queen accused the prince of humiliating her and he answered with a charge that left the king visibly shaken. Charles had arranged the meeting without senior aides because he wanted the dispute handled as a family matter before it became an institutional crisis. An institutional crisis meant a conflict serious enough to damage the working structure of the monarchy itself. William arrived carrying both the leaked memo and the earlier passenger manifest, proving that his decision came from a pattern, not one confused journey. Camilla placed her palm firmly on the document. "You had no right to lock me out without speaking to me," she said. The Queen's voice was controlled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. She had been stopped in front of her own household and made to feel like an outsider. William did not look away. The prince answered that the rules had been changed without speaking to him. He said the security of the royal train could not depend on personal preference, private loyalty, or who felt entitled to enter a protected carriage. Charles stepped forward and tried to calm them. The king barely began speaking before Camilla turned toward him. She asked whether he supported the removal. He hesitated. That silence cut deeper than any accusation. William opened the memo and read its most serious sentence aloud. Future operational objections from the Prince of Wales's office were to be treated as advisory rather than binding. In plain terms, his staff could warn Camilla's household about a security concern, but they could no longer stop the decision. Camilla admitted she knew the sentence was there. The Queen argued that it was meant to prevent William's staff from controlling every detail of her official life. She said she had spent years earning her place and would not allow another household to reduce her role through quiet restrictions. The prince replied that status did not erase responsibility. Charles gripped the back of a chair as he realized the truth. His wife was defending her position. His heir was defending future authority. Neither would retreat. William then delivered the decision. Access would not be restored until every instruction in the memo was withdrawn and a formal review was completed. Camilla looked at Charles one final time. "Silence is also a decision," she told him. The confrontation ended with the door closing behind the Queen, but the true decision remained inside the room, where Charles now faced the authority he had given his wife and the future he had promised his son. William could stop a journey, but only Charles could decide whether the restriction became palace policy. That distinction placed the king at the center of the crisis. One signature could restore Camilla's access and weaken his son. Another could uphold the ban and leave his wife publicly diminished. As advisors waited outside, Charles sat with two documents before him and discovered that royal power can feel most brutal when exercised against someone you love. Charles understood the chain of command clearly. The monarch held final control over royal travel, while the heir's office carried growing responsibility for security, continuity, and the future shape of the crown. William's order was only an emergency suspension, a temporary block issued to prevent further risk. The king now had to confirm it, change it, or erase it completely. The room fell silent as Charles turned to his private secretary. He asked whether restoring Camilla's access would expose the railway system to more conflict. The official chose his words carefully, but the answer was unmistakable. Yes. Reinstatement without a full review would weaken every future security decision. Charles lifted his pen and held it above the authorization form. For a moment, the king seemed ready to sign. Then he lowered his hand and placed the pen beside the paper. He could not restore her access, not yet. The decision tore at him. Supporting William would look like abandonment at the exact moment Camilla felt most isolated. She had already faced the locked doors, the watching staff, and the knowledge that her place beside the monarch had been questioned in public. William spoke to his father privately before the final order was issued. The prince warned that reversing the suspension would send a dangerous message across every palace office. It would prove that security rules could be defeated by status, emotion, or personal pressure. Then the technical review delivered something worse. Officials discovered that the memo had moved beyond discussion. Early steps had already been taken to create new access credentials for two members of Camilla's household. One request would have allowed entry into a communications compartment, a protected area used for sensitive calls, schedules, and official messages wooding royal travel. Charles no longer hesitated. The king confirmed the suspension and authorized William to supervise a full review of access to the royal train. Camilla received the written decision later that evening. She read every line slowly. The queen searched the page for something personal from her husband, a note, an apology, even one sentence of explanation. There was nothing. The absence of a single handwritten word told Camilla what the formal decision could not. Charles had chosen the institution, and she would now have to live with the consequences alone. The punishment became real the following morning. The royal train departed without Camilla, carrying staff members who had expected to serve her only hours earlier. No announcement was made from the platform. No explanation was offered to those watching. Yet one empty place inside the principal carriage said everything. For the first time since entering the highest circle of royal life, the Queen understood what exclusion felt like when it arrived not through gossip, but through an order bearing the heir's authority. Camilla's engagement continued by car, while the train was reassigned to another official journey. The change kept the royal schedule moving and prevented the palace from appearing paralyzed by family conflict. Her household, however, lost direct control over rail planning. Every future request would now pass through a joint security panel, a small group responsible for checking passengers, routes, and protected access under William's supervision. The Queen watched a morning broadcast as the familiar carriages left the station. She remained still until the final carriage disappeared, then switched off the screen before the presenter finished speaking. The journey had continued without her. That was the message. Camilla called her sister privately, and finally released the anger she had hidden from staff. She said the decision had been designed to make her appear untrustworthy, not simply correct a mistake. The Queen believed the locked doors had turned a procedural dispute into a public judgment on her place beside Charles. The king visited later, carrying no officials and no prepared explanation. Camilla asked him directly whether he believed she had endangered the crown. Charles avoided the question. He spoke instead about security, pressure, and the need to protect the institution. His careful words only deepened her pain. Then the consequences widened. 2 aides connected to the memo were removed from transport duties. Their dismissal showed that the palace viewed the matter as more than a family disagreement. William also ordered an audit, a formal check of previous journeys and access records. The review uncovered 3 occasions when passenger changes had been made after the approved manifest was completed. The prince now possessed enough evidence to make the restriction permanent. Camilla opened her desk drawer and removed a small itinerary card from an earlier royal train journey. She folded it once, placed it inside a box, and closed the lid without another word. Before William could issue the final order, Catherine intervened. The princess urged him to meet Camilla alone, without Charles, advisors, or palace officials controlling the conversation. The next meeting would not be about codes, manifests, or household rules. It would be about whether 2 people divided by history could finally speak without the crown standing between them. Their second meeting began without a file on the table. There were no secretaries outside the door, and no king positioned between them. William arrived first. Camilla entered moments later and chose the chair opposite him, leaving a deliberate distance between them. For several seconds neither spoke. Then she asked the question, hidden beneath every argument they had exchanged. Was the restriction truly about the train, or had he never trusted her to stand beside the crown? Catherine had pushed William toward this moment. The princess believed the official decision was already settled, but the personal damage would keep growing unless he explained himself directly. Camilla agreed only after receiving a private assurance that Charles would not attend and no formal record would be made. That meant no transcript, no palace summary, and no institutional shield between them. Camilla spoke first. The Queen told William that the locked platform had made her feel as though decades of service had been erased in one public gesture. She had endured suspicion, criticism, and years of pressure to prove that she belonged beside the king. Then one closed door made all of it feel temporary. William did not deny the pain. The prince admitted that he knew the order would humiliate her. He also believed that waiting would allow the disputed changes to become permanent. Once new access rules entered the system, reversing them would become harder, and every future security warning could be ignored. Camilla leaned forward and asked whether old family wounds had shaped his judgment. William did not pretend the past meant nothing. The future king said history had left scars, but he would have acted against anyone who issued the same memo. To him, the threat came from the wording, not only the person behind it. Then Camilla revealed the truth through that private conversation. She had approved the language because she felt increasingly pushed aside as more duties shifted toward William and Catherine. The Queen feared that her influence was shrinking, while the next royal chapter moved ahead without her. William understood the fear, but he refused to excuse the choice. The prince said every household had become defensive during the transition of power, the gradual transfer of duties and influence from the reigning monarch to the heir. Fear, he warned, could not justify bypassing security or weakening future authority. Camilla finally agreed to withdraw the memo, dismiss the advisor who proposed its harshest wording, and accept the joint review. William slid a blank sheet of palace stationery toward her. She pushed it back. "I will do it through the proper office," the Queen said. No secrecy. The agreement did not restore her access, but it gave Charles room to announce a final settlement without showing an openly divided family. The anger had finally broken, but the consequences remained. Now the palace had to explain why a queen had lost access to one of the monarchy's most protected symbols. By sunrise, the locked train had become the image Britain could not ignore. Broadcasters replayed footage of the empty platform. Commentators argued over authority, marriage, security, and succession. Yet one newspaper transformed the entire crisis into a single devastating symbol. A full-page photograph of the royal train disappearing into the distance beneath the headline, "Queen Left Behind." Inside the palace, that image reached Camilla before breakfast and confirmed that the private wound had become public history. The palace moved quickly, but its statement said very little. Officials confirmed only that royal transport procedures were under review. Royal transport procedures meant the rules controlling who could travel, who could enter protected areas, and how security decisions were approved. Camilla was not named. The leaked memo was not mentioned. That silence made the story even louder. William became the center of the debate within hours. The prince had not yet become king, but many now asked whether he was already exercising the authority of one. Some saw strength, others saw a son publicly weakening his father's wife. The lack of detail allowed every fear, resentment, and old loyalty to rush into the open. The newspaper front page captured the mood perfectly. The royal train was shown leaving the station, while part of the platform remained empty beneath the words, "Queen Left Behind." Camilla found the paper among her morning briefings. The Queen looked at it once, turned it face down, and continued eating without speaking. A crowd gathered near the gates of Buckingham Palace. Some supporters praised William for protecting the monarchy from private interference. Others accused the future king of humiliating Camilla in a way no family member deserved. The argument was no longer hidden behind palace doors. It belonged to the public now. William watched one broadcaster call the restriction his strongest display of authority yet. The prince shifted uncomfortably. He had acted to protect a secure system, not to claim victory over the Queen. Yet the country had turned his decision into a preview of the reign to come. Then the palace quietly briefed senior correspondents through a private background statement. The memo had been withdrawn. The proposed access credentials had never been activated. Charles also approved a final rule. No royal household could independently change passenger access, security clearance, or entry to restricted compartments. The debate slowly changed. Camilla's humiliation remained painful, but attention moved toward William's decisiveness and what it revealed about the future monarchy. Only one question remained. Would the Queen ever be allowed aboard the royal train again? The public had delivered its judgment in headlines and arguments, but the lasting verdict would come from a quieter place, the King's desk, where Camilla's future access awaited one final signature. The final decision arrived without ceremony. There was no family summit, no dramatic announcement, and no attempt to reverse what had happened. Charles signed a permanent transport protocol, confirming that Camilla would no longer possess automatic access to the royal train. She could travel aboard it again, only for approved official duties, under the same clearance process applied to every senior royal. William had not removed her forever, but he had ended the privilege of unquestioned entry. Charles understood exactly what the protocol meant. A permanent transport protocol was a binding set of rules controlling future travel, access, and security decisions. Camilla's unrestricted personal entry was revoked for good. She could still use the train for approved royal duties, but only after passing through the same security process required of every other senior member of the family. The king signed the document, closed the folder, and looked toward his private secretary. No household, he said, would stand above the rules again. Not William's, not Camilla's, and not his own. The leaked memo was formally cancelled. The proposed credentials were destroyed, and future decisions were transferred to a joint royal security board, responsible for reviewing passengers, access, and protected compartments. Camilla received the verdict in private. The Queen read slowly until she reached the word permanent. Her expression tightened, but she did not argue. She signed the acknowledgement and returned it without asking for another meeting. Later, Camilla spoke directly to Charles. She told the king that she accepted the outcome, but she would not pretend the way she had been removed caused no pain. The locked platform, the silent order, and the public humiliation had changed something between them. Charles finally admitted what he had avoided. His silence during the crisis had deepened her isolation. The monarch apologized, and Camilla accepted it, but their relationship emerged more sober, less protected by titles and ceremony. William refused to describe the result as a victory. The prince told Catherine that protecting the crown sometimes meant accepting that the right decision could still wound a family. She understood that his authority had grown, but so had the burden attached to it. The verdict was now complete. Camilla lost a privilege, but kept her official place. William gained authority, but carried the emotional cost. Charles protected the rules, but could no longer hide from the conflict between husband and sovereign. The royal train became a symbol of a changed monarchy. Access would be earned through duty. Power would be restrained by responsibility. Even the Queen would have to stop when the future king closed the door. The train eventually moved again, but the monarchy that boarded it was no longer governed by private expectation. William had drawn the boundary. Camilla had accepted the consequence, and Charles had confirmed the final principle. Within the crown, duty would come before privilege, even when the cost was deeply personal. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.